The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to Ethan Sterling long after he left the hospital, a cruel reminder of the life hanging in the balance. His wife, Clara, lay in a coma, their unborn child's fate a fragile question mark whispered by grim-faced doctors. The woman responsible was his mistress, Isabella, her face a mask of chilling composure on the evening news. Everyone expected fury, a millionaire's wrath unleashed in a courtroom spectacle. They expected him to burn her world to the ground, just as she had shattered his. But no one, least of all Clara's grieving family, could have predicted what Ethan would say when he finally took the stand. No one could have fathomed that his confession would not be one of righteous anger, but of a shared, devastating guilt that would unravel a secret buried far deeper than his infidelity. The Sterling residence in the hills overlooking the city was less a home and more a monument to success. It was a structure of glass and steel, with infinity pools that bled into the horizon and rooms so vast they seemed to swallow sound. For Ethan Sterling, it was the physical manifestation of a promise he'd made to a younger, poorer version of himself. At 34, he was the CEO of Innovate, a tech firm he'd built from a garage startup into $1 billion empire. He had the sharp jawline, the custom-tailored suits, and the restless energy of a man who believed sleep was a market inefficiency. His wife, Clara, was the heart he'd installed in his glass palace. She was grace and warmth, a former art curator whose laughter was the only thing that could truly fill the cavernous spaces. They'd met at a charity gala, a whirlwind romance that felt like a screenplay. He was captivated by her quiet confidence, the way she saw the world in shades of color and emotion he'd long since forgotten. She was drawn to the vulnerability she glimpsed behind his corporate armor. Now, she was 6 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter they'd already decided to name Lily. Clara moved through their home like a ghost in silk maternity wear. The morning sickness had passed, replaced by a profound and aching loneliness. Ethan's work had always been demanding, but now it was an obsession. He'd leave before the sun touched the cool marble floors and return long after she'd eaten a solitary dinner prepared by their private chef. He'd kiss her forehead, his mind still buzzing with algorithms and stock prices, and murmur apologies that sounded rehearsed. "Big merger on the horizon, darling," he'd say, loosening his tie. "Just a few more months of this, and I'm all yours. All yours." She wanted to believe him. She'd trace the curve of her belly and whisper to the life inside. "Your daddy is building us a kingdom." But sometimes, in the dead of night, she'd wake up and find his side of the bed cold. She'd find him in his home office, bathed in the blue glow of 6 different monitors, a titan alone with his numbers. The kingdom felt more and more like a gilded cage, beautiful but cold, and she was the prized bird he'd forgotten to visit. The only consistent presence in her life, besides the hired staff, was Isabella Rossi. Isabella was Ethan's executive assistant, a woman so efficient she seemed to anticipate his needs before he did. She was sharp, ambitious, and possessed a sleek, understated beauty that was the polar opposite of Clara's gentle radiance. She was always there, a shadow at Ethan's side in the office, and often a voice on the phone, arranging his life with seamless precision. "Mr. Sterling's flight from Zurich has been delayed by an hour, Mrs. Sterling," Isabella's voice would chirp, impossibly polite. "He asked me to let you know he'll miss dinner but sends his love." Clara tried to be kind to her. She'd offer her coffee when she occasionally dropped off documents at the house. "You work so hard, Isabella. Ethan would be lost without you." Isabella would smile, a quick, tight curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Sterling. He's an inspiration to work for." But beneath the veneer of professional admiration, A venomous envy was taking root. Isabella hadn't clawed her way out of a working-class neighborhood, graduating top of her class and outmaneuvering every rival, just to be the woman behind the man. She wanted to be the woman beside him. She saw Clara's life, the effortless luxury, the security, the baby, not as a blessing but as an unearned prize. She saw Clara not as a person, but as an obstacle, a beautifully fragile, inconvenient obstacle. One rainy Tuesday, Clara felt a flutter in her womb, a tiny, insistent kick. Overwhelmed with joy, she called Ethan's private line, bypassing Isabella for once. He answered, his voice distracted. "Clara, is everything okay? I'm in the middle of a board meeting." "She kicked," Clara laughed, tears welling in her eyes. "Our little Lily, she just kicked me. It was the most amazing feeling." There was a pause. She could hear the muffled sound of someone else talking in the room. That's great, honey. Really. Listen, I have to go. We'll celebrate tonight. I promise." The line went dead. Clara stood in the middle of her silent living room, her hand pressed against her belly. The joy evaporated, leaving a cold, familiar ache. She was celebrating the miracle of life alone. And in an office across town, Isabella Rossi listened to the faint echo of the conversation from the boardroom, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather of her notepad. A promise. Ethan was always making promises he couldn't keep, and she, Isabella, was always there to pick up the pieces. The affair didn't start with a spark. It was a slow burn, fueled by proximity and shared ambition. It began with late nights at the office, poring over contracts under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was Isabella remembering Ethan's coffee order, black, 2 sweeteners, when he was too stressed to remember it himself. It was the way her eyes would light up when he explained a complex market strategy, a stark contrast to Clara's polite but distant interest. Ethan told himself it was harmless. Isabella understood him. She understood the relentless pressure, the hunger to win, the fear of failure that nipped at his heels no matter how high he climbed. With her, he wasn't just a husband or a soon-to-be father. He was a general, and she was his most trusted lieutenant. The line blurred one night in Shanghai. They had just closed a monumental deal, the culmination of a sleepless, 72-hour negotiation. The celebratory champagne in the hotel bar tasted like victory. Adrenaline coursed through him. He looked at Isabella, her dark hair catching the city lights from the panoramic window, her gaze intense and unwavering. "We did it," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion and triumph. "You did it, Ethan," she corrected softly, using his first name for the first time outside the confines of their private work sessions. "I just cleared the path." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch lingered. It was a small thing, a gesture that could be dismissed as camaraderie, but they both felt the charge. It was a door creaking open. That night, he went back to his suite alone, but the memory of that touch, of that shared, predatory ambition, stayed with him. He thought of Clara, asleep in their bed, miles and oceans away, her soft, trusting love a world apart from the thrilling, dangerous energy he felt with Isabella. The guilt was a dull throb, easily silenced by the roar of his success. Back in the States, the dynamic shifted. The stolen glances became longer, the professional distance shorter. Isabella's hand would brush his as she passed him a file. He'd find excuses to call her into his office, just to talk, to feel that invigorating connection. He was living a double life, meticulously compartmentalizing his worlds. There was Ethan, the doting husband who rubbed Clara's swollen feet at night, and there was Ethan, the powerful CEO who found an intellectual and emotional equal in his assistant. The day Clara announced the pregnancy at a small dinner party with their closest friends, Ethan played his part to perfection. He beamed, he toasted, he held her close and kissed her temple, whispering how much he loved her. And he did love her. That was the most confusing part. He loved the life she represented, the peace and stability she offered. But when he went to the office the next day, the news hung in the air between him and Isabella like a toxic cloud. She was arranging his schedule on a tablet, her face impassive. "Congratulations are in order, I suppose," she said, her voice clipped. "Izzy," he started, using the pet name that had developed between them. She looked up, and for the first time, he saw the mask slip. Her eyes were filled with a raw, desperate pain that mirrored the dark, selfish part of his own heart. "So that's it then? The happy family? The perfect life? It's not that simple," he stammered, feeling like a fraud. "Isn't it?" she shot back, her voice low and fierce. "She wins. She gets you. The name, the baby, everything. And what do I get? I get to book your pediatrician appointments and order your damn flowers for Mother's Day." The confrontation ended with a desperate, frantic kiss in the sterile confines of his office, the blinds drawn. It was not a kiss of love, but of frustration, of shared desperation, of two people clinging to an illusion of power. It sealed their pact. The affair was no longer a simmering undercurrent. It was a raging fire, and they were both willingly walking into the flames. Isabella became more possessive, more demanding. The late nights became overnights, excused by business emergencies. Ethan's guilt grew, but so did his dependency on her. She was a drug, an escape from the impending reality of fatherhood, a responsibility that terrified him more than any market crash. Clara felt the shift. The distance between them became a chasm. The scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the vague and hurried explanations for his absences. She confronted him one evening, her voice trembling but firm. "Ethan, are you having an affair?" He looked her straight in the eye, the lie coming to his lips with practiced ease. "Of course not, darling. Don't be ridiculous. I'm just under a lot of pressure. I love you. I love our baby." He held her, and she let him, wanting so desperately to believe the lie. She buried her face in his chest, convincing herself it was the pregnancy hormones, the anxiety of becoming a mother. But the seed of doubt had been planted. And as Ethan held his pregnant wife, his mind was on the text message he'd just received from Isabella. "My place." Now, Isabella's obsession festered. Every photo of Clara on social media, a hand cradling her growing belly, a visit to a baby boutique, was a fresh stab of resentment. Clara wasn't just a wife anymore. She was the vessel for the sterling heir. The one thing that would forever cement her place in Ethan's life, a bond Isabella could never break. The baby was a ticking clock, counting down the moments until Isabella was relegated back to the shadows for good. Her desperation began to warp her thinking. She wasn't a bad person, she told herself. She was a victim of circumstance. She was the one who truly deserved Ethan's life, not this fragile, naive woman who had simply been in the right place at the right time. She just needed to remove the obstacle. Not permanently, of course. Just a setback. Something to disrupt the perfect narrative, to make Clara seem weak, unstable, a miscarriage. The thought, once monstrous, became a plausible, almost logical solution in her poisoned mind. She spent weeks researching online, diving into obscure forums about herbal remedies and their potent effects. She learned about plants that could induce uterine contractions, herbs that were harmless in small doses, but dangerous for expectant mothers. She settled on a specific, hard-to-trace oleander extract, a compound known for its cardiac toxicity that, in the right quantity, could mimic the symptoms of severe preeclampsia. It was clever. It was deniable. The opportunity came on a Friday. Ethan was flying to Tokyo for a 48-hour trip, a whirlwind of meetings she had meticulously arranged. She knew Clara was hosting a small book club that afternoon. "I have to drop off the final Japan itinerary for Mr. Sterling," Isabella said, on the phone to Clara, her voice a symphony of professionalism. "I can just leave it with the gate security if you're busy." "Oh, don't be silly, Isabella," Clara replied, her usual warmth radiating through the phone. "Come in for a cup of tea. It's dreary out, and my friends won't be here for another hour." It was perfect. Isabella arrived with a sleek leather folio and a small, elegantly wrapped box. "A little something for the baby," she said, handing it to Clara. "And I brought some of my favorite chamomile lavender tea. I know how stressful things have been for Ethan, and I thought you could use a moment of calm, too." Clara was touched. "Isabella, that's so thoughtful. Thank you." In the vast, sun-drenched kitchen, Isabella watched as Clara filled the kettle. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and fear. While Clara's back was turned, retrieving her favorite mugs from a high cabinet, Isabella's hand moved with swift, practiced precision. She opened the tea tin she'd brought, her fingers trembling slightly as she sprinkled the fine, odorless powder from a tiny vial into the loose-leaf tea, mixing it in quickly. The vial disappeared back into her pocket. It was done. She sat opposite Clara at the polished marble island, sipping her own untainted cup of tea, making small talk about the weather and the upcoming baby shower. She watched Clara lift the mug to her lips. She watched her drink. Every sip was a victory, a step closer to getting what she deserved. "This is lovely," Clara said, smiling. "So relaxing." Isabella smiled back, a hollow, terrifying imitation of warmth. "I'm so glad." An hour after Isabella left, Clara's book club friends arrived to find her on the floor. She was pale, clutching her stomach, her breathing shallow and ragged. The teacup lay shattered beside her. The panic was immediate, a flurry of frantic 911 calls and terrified whispers. At 30,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, Ethan Sterling accepted a glass of champagne from a flight attendant, blissfully unaware that his world had just caught fire. The first sign of trouble was when he landed in Tokyo, and his phone exploded with a barrage of missed calls and frantic texts from Clara's sister, Amelia. "Call me emergency. Clara is in the hospital." The blood drained from his face. He stumbled through the terminal, his mind a chaotic vortex of fear. He chartered a private jet back immediately, the 12-hour flight a living hell of silence and speculation. He tortured himself with possibilities, a car accident, a fall, a complication with the pregnancy. The idea of foul play never once crossed his mind. He arrived at the hospital, looking like a man who had been dragged through hell. Clara's family met him in the hallway, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and cold fury. "What did you do?" Amelia spat, her voice dripping with venom. "What? I was in Tokyo. What happened?" Ethan pleaded. A doctor, a woman with tired, compassionate eyes, pulled him aside. "Mr. Sterling, your wife is in a medically induced coma. We had to stabilize her heart rate. She was suffering from severe cardiac arrhythmia. Her heart, was it the pregnancy? Preeclampsia?" The doctor shook her head slowly. "No. Her initial toxicology report came back. We found the traces of a cardenolide glycoside. It's a plant-based poison. Someone did this to her, Mr. Sterling. And to your unborn child." The doctor paused, letting the weight of her words land. "We were able to stabilize the baby's heart rate for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. For both of them." Ethan's world tilted on its axis. Poison. The word didn't compute. It was something from a movie, not his life. He stared through the glass of the ICU door at Clara, pale and still, a web of tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped in a steady, terrifying rhythm. Who? Why? Then a detective approached him, his expression grim. "Mr. Sterling, we have a suspect in custody. Your assistant, Isabella Rossi. We found a vial containing the same substance in her apartment, and her fingerprints are on the tea tin from your kitchen. She's confessed." The floor fell away. Isabella. Izzy. The late nights, the secret kisses, the shared ambition. It all curdled into something monstrous. He saw her smile, the one she'd given Clara in the kitchen, and finally understood its terrifying emptiness. He hadn't just had an affair. He had invited a predator into his home, and she had tried to murder his wife and child. He leaned against the wall, the sterile hospital scent filling his lungs, and was overcome by a wave of nausea, so profound he thought he would collapse. The kingdom he'd built had crumbled to dust, and he was standing in the ruins, covered in the ashes of his own betrayal. The trial of Isabella Rossi became a media sensation. It had all the elements of a prime-time drama: wealth, sex, betrayal, and attempted murder. The narrative was simple and damning. The scorned mistress, mad with jealousy, tries to eliminate her rival. The public, fueled by sensationalist headlines, had already passed its verdict. Isabella was a monster. Ethan Sterling was the tragic, betrayed husband, a victim of a venomous sociopath. Clara had miraculously woken from her coma a week after the incident. The baby, against all odds, was still viable, though the pregnancy was now considered extremely high risk. Clara was physically weak, but emotionally shattered. The double blow of her husband's infidelity and his mistress's attempt on her life had hollowed her out, leaving behind a cold, hard shell of fury. She refused to see Ethan, communicating only through her lawyers and her sister. The divorce papers were served to him while he sat in a sterile waiting room, a grim confirmation of the life he had single-handedly destroyed. When Ethan was called to the stand as the prosecution's star witness, a hush fell over the packed courtroom. He looked gaunt, a shadow of the confident titan who had once graced the covers of business magazines. His expensive suit hung off his diminished frame. All eyes were on him: the jury, the media, Clara's family, and Clara herself, sitting in the front row, her face pale and impassive, a small but visible baby bump beneath her dress. Isabella sat at the defendant's table, her expression unreadable. The prosecutor, a sharp man named David Chen, began gently. "Mr. Sterling, please describe your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Isabella Rossi." Ethan cleared his throat, his voice raspy. "She was my executive assistant, and we were having an affair." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was the first public confirmation. Chen guided him through the timeline of the betrayal, painting a picture of Ethan as a man manipulated by an ambitious subordinate. He presented Ethan as the ultimate victim. "And when you learned what she had done to your pregnant wife, what was your reaction?" This was the moment everyone was waiting for. The moment the millionaire would unleash his righteous fury, condemn his monstrous mistress, and seal her fate. Ethan looked away from the prosecutor, his gaze sweeping past the jury, past the stony faces of his in-laws, and landing on Isabella. For the first time, he didn't see a monster. He saw a broken woman, the product of a ruthless ambition he himself had cultivated and celebrated. Then he looked at Clara, at the profound pain in her eyes, a pain he was equally responsible for. He turned back to the prosecutor. "My reaction," he began, his voice cracking with an emotion no one expected. "My reaction was horror. But not just at her. At myself. The prosecutor froze, his line of questioning derailed. Mr. Sterling, she did a monstrous thing, Ethan said, his voice growing stronger, clearer. An unforgivable thing. She tried to take away the two most precious things in my life. And for that, she should be punished. He paused, taking a deep breath. But if we are talking about how we got here, how a woman like her was driven to do something so desperate, then you have to look at me. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the judge leaned forward. I am the one who created the environment for this tragedy, Ethan continued, his words a torrent of confession. I rewarded ruthless ambition above all else, in my company, in my life. I saw that same hunger in Isabella, and I didn't temper it with morality. I fueled it because it served my own goals. I made her believe that winning was the only thing that mattered, because it was the only thing that mattered to me. His eyes found Clara's. I neglected my wife. I left her alone in a glass house while I chased deals and fed my own ego. I starved her of the love and attention she deserved, and then feasted on the admiration of another woman. I lied. To Clara, to Isabella, to myself. I built a world based on deceit, and then I acted surprised when it bred a monster. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, what Isabella Rossi did was a crime. But it was not born in a vacuum. It was born in the moral vacuum I created. I am as responsible for my wife and child being in that hospital bed as she is. The final bombshell landed with the force of a physical blow. I don't say this to excuse her, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. I say this because justice without truth is just revenge. The truth is, I broke my vows. I broke my wife's heart. I led another human being down a path of obsession and desperation. I ask the court to show her whatever mercy the law allows, because I know that I don't deserve any. He finished, slumping back in the witness chair, emotionally spent. A chaotic uproar erupted in the courtroom. Reporters scrambled. Clara's sister was shouting, her face contorted in disbelief and rage. But Clara herself just stared at Ethan, her hard expression cracking. For the first time in weeks, she saw not just the man who had betrayed her, but a man utterly and completely broken by his own actions. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even understanding, but it was the first, tiny fissure in the wall of ice that had encased her heart. The millionaire's response hadn't just shocked the court, it had irrevocably changed the course of all their lives. Ethan's courtroom confession detonated a bomb in his life. The media, which had once painted him as a tragic hero, now recast him as a manipulative villain, the architect of his own downfall. Headlines screamed, Sterling's shocking confession, I am responsible. His company's board of directors, already reeling from the scandal, swiftly called an emergency meeting. In a sterile, soulless conference room, the men he'd once called his partners asked for his resignation. There was no argument, no fight left in him. He signed the papers, handing over the empire he'd bled for, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. His kingdom was gone. The fallout was swift and brutal. Friends stopped calling. Business associates crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a walking symbol of spectacular failure. He moved out of the glass house on the hill, unable to bear the silence and the memories, and into a nondescript downtown apartment. The days bled together in a haze of guilt and self-loathing. He'd stare at the blank walls for hours, replaying every lie, every choice, every moment of weakness that had led to this. The image of Clara in her hospital bed, pale and still, was burned into his mind. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He was spiraling, consumed by the abyss he had confessed to creating, Meanwhile, Clara was fighting her own battles. Discharged from the hospital, she moved in with her sister, Amelia. Her body was healing, but her spirit was fractured. The world felt unsafe. Love felt like a lie, and the future was a terrifying blank. Her daughter, a tiny warrior who had survived poison in the womb, was her only anchor. Every kick, every flutter was a reminder of what she had almost lost, and what she still had to live for. Her anger at Ethan was a physical thing, a constant burning rage. How dare he? How dare he stand up in court and try to claim some twisted moral high ground by admitting his guilt? It felt like another performance, another manipulation. He didn't get to be the repentant sinner. He was the cause. He was the disease. The divorce was proceeding with cold, legal efficiency. Clara wanted nothing from him. Not his money, not his name. She wanted him erased. Her lawyer, a formidable woman named Jessica, was pushing for full custody, with supervised visitation for Ethan at best. "He's unstable, Clara," Jessica argued. "His courtroom admission is proof of his reckless character. No judge will grant him significant access," Clara agreed. The thought of Ethan alone with their daughter sent a jolt of fear through her. Yet a small, traitorous part of her couldn't shake his words from her mind. It was not born in a vacuum. It was born in the moral vacuum I created. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a truth she had felt in her lonely nights in that glass house. It didn't absolve him, but it complicated her hatred, weaving in threads of a sorrow so deep it felt like her own. Isabella Rossi, thanks in part to Ethan's testimony and a powerful plea of remorse from her own defense attorney, was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 5. It was a lighter sentence than the prosecution had demanded, a result that infuriated Clara's family, but felt strangely irrelevant to Clara herself. Isabella's fate was a distant echo. The real wreckage was in her own life. Weeks later, Clara went into premature labor. It was a terrifying, high-stakes delivery. The doctors and nurses moved with urgent, quiet competence. Amelia was by her side, holding her hand, but in the most intense moments of pain and fear, Clara found herself thinking of Ethan. Not with love, but with a primal, instinctual sense of loss. He should have been here. This was the moment they had dreamed of, and it was now just another casualty of their shared war. Hope Sterling was born small but screaming, a furious announcement of her arrival into a world that had tried to reject her. She had a full head of dark hair, like Ethan's, and Clara's determined chin. Holding her for the first time, skin to skin, Clara felt a wave of love so fierce and protective it eclipsed everything else. It was a raw, animal instinct. This tiny, perfect creature was hers. Hers to protect, hers to raise, hers to shield from the broken world her father had created. Amelia, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and emotion, handled the communication. She sent a single text to Ethan. A girl, 7:02 a.m., 5 LBS2 Oz. Mother and baby are stable. Ethan received the text in his sterile apartment, sitting on the edge of an unmade bed. He stared at the words, his hands trembling. A girl. She was real. She was alive. A wave of emotions, so potent it brought him to his knees, crashed over him. Relief so profound it felt like pain. Joy so sharp it was indistinguishable from grief. And a desperate, aching love for a daughter he was terrified he would never be allowed to know. He called Amelia, his voice a hoarse whisper. Can I see her?" "I don't know if that's a good idea, Ethan." Amelia's voice was cold. "Clara is exhausted. She doesn't need the stress." "Please, Amelia," he begged, all pride gone. "Just for a minute. I won't talk to Clara if she doesn't want me to. I just need to see my daughter." There was a long pause. He could hear the faint sound of a baby crying in the background. "I'll ask," Amelia said, and hung up. An hour later, another text arrived. "Room 304, you have 5 minutes." Walking into that hospital felt like walking to his own execution. He scrubbed his hands raw at the nurse's station, put on a paper mask, and pushed open the door to room 304. The air was thick with tension. Amelia stood like a sentry by the window. Clara was propped up in bed, looking exhausted and beautiful, cradling a small bundle in her arms. She didn't look at him. Her entire focus was on the baby. "Clara," he whispered. She flinched but didn't respond. Amelia stepped forward. 5 minutes, Ethan." He approached the bed slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. He looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face of his daughter, her eyes squeezed shut, her little mouth working silently. She was perfect. She was a miracle. Tears streamed down his face, soaking into his mask. "She's beautiful," he choked out. Clara remained silent, her grip on the baby possessive. "What's her name?" he asked, already knowing he had no right to. This time Clara spoke, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Hope." The name was a punch to the gut. Hope. It was everything he'd destroyed and everything he now clung to. It was both a tribute and an accusation. He reached out a hesitant, trembling hand, not to touch the baby, but just to hover in her space, to feel her presence. "Hope," he repeated softly. It was a prayer. For a brief, infinite moment, Clara's gaze lifted from the baby and met his. He saw a universe of pain in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a shared, somber acknowledgement of the miracle lying between them. In that moment, they weren't a failed husband and a betrayed wife. They were simply two parents, bound together forever by this tiny, fragile life. His 5 minutes were up. He backed away, his eyes never leaving the baby. "Thank you," he whispered to Clara's averted face. He turned and left the room, the image of his daughter, hope, seared into his soul. It was the first day of the rest of his life. The bottom was behind him. The climb back up, no matter how impossible it seemed, had just begun. The months that followed Hope's birth were a study in quiet, painful reconstruction. The divorce was finalized with grim efficiency. Clara, wanting a clean break, refused alimony, accepting only a generous child support trust that Ethan established, managed by a third party. She and Hope moved into a modest but charming 2-bedroom house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a world away from the cold glamour of her former life. She filled it with art, plants, and the warm clutter of baby toys. It was a home built on resilience, not wealth. Ethan's life underwent an even more dramatic transformation. He sold his soulless downtown apartment and used the last of his personal fortune, the portion not tied up in the divorce or legal fees, to buy a small, unremarkable house just 2 towns over from Clara. He sold his designer suits, his luxury car, his collection of expensive watches. He learned to cook, to clean, to live a life stripped of assistance and accolades. His penance was self-imposed and absolute. He took a job at a local community college, teaching introductory business classes. The man who once commanded boardrooms now stood in front of bored freshmen, explaining supply and demand. It was humbling. It was grounding. For the first time in his adult life, his success wasn't measured in stock points, but in the flicker of understanding in a student's eyes. The co-parenting arrangement was brutally structured, every Tuesday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. and every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Ethan was allowed to see Hope. The handoffs were excruciatingly awkward. They took place on Clara's front porch. She would hand him the diaper bag, her expression neutral, her words clipped and functional. "She needs to be fed at noon. Her nap schedule is on the sheet. Don't be late." "I won't," he'd promise, his heart aching at the chasm between them. In those early days, he was terrified. He'd hold Hope in his arms, this tiny human he was half responsible for, and be paralyzed by the fear of doing something wrong. He learned to change diapers, to warm bottles, to distinguish a cry of hunger from a cry of fatigue. He'd spend his hours with her at the park, pushing her on the baby swing, his face a mask of intense concentration and awe. He spoke to her constantly, not in baby talk, but in long, rambling monologues of apology and promise. "I messed up, little one," he'd whisper as she slept in his arms. "I really messed up, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it right. I'm going to be a man you can be proud of." Clara watched from a distance. She'd see him at the park, completely focused on their daughter, and a confusing mix of emotions would swirl within her. The anger was still there, a low, constant hum, but it was now joined by a reluctant respect. This was not the Ethan she knew. The ruthless, ambitious CEO was gone. In his place was just a dad. A dad who was trying, who showed up on time, every time, with a quiet humility that was more powerful than any grand gesture. Slowly, imperceptibly, the ice began to thaw. The handoffs on the porch lasted a few seconds longer. "She's started teething," Clara mentioned one Tuesday, a hint of exhaustion in her voice. "She's been fussy. I bought some of those cooling rings," Ethan offered, pointing to the diaper bag. "The ones you mentioned last week, and some chamomile drops. I read they can help." Clara blinked, surprised he'd remembered a passing comment. "Oh, thank you." The first real breakthrough came on Hope's first birthday. They had agreed on a small party at Clara's house, just her, Amelia, and a few of Clara's new friends. Ethan was invited for 1 hour. He arrived with a single, simply wrapped gift, a handcrafted wooden rocking horse he'd spent months building in his garage. He watched from the corner of the living room as Hope, with Clara's help, tore open the wrapping paper. Her face lit up with a gummy, delighted smile. He saw Clara run a hand over the smooth, polished wood, her expression unreadable. As he was leaving, she walked him to the door. "The horse is beautiful, Ethan. I'm glad she likes it," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "She loves it," Clara corrected softly. There was a pause, the first comfortable silence that had existed between them in over a year. "You're a good father, Ethan." He looked up, his eyes filled with shock and gratitude. The words were a balm on a wound he thought would never heal. "Thank you, Clara. That means everything to me." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation of their marriage. But it was a recognition, acknowledgement that the man standing before her was not the same man who had shattered her life. He was a man on the hard road to redemption, and for the first time, she believed he might actually make it to the destination. 4 years passed. Hope was a bright, talkative 5-year-old, the undisputed center of both their worlds. The co-parenting arrangement had evolved from a rigid schedule into a fluid partnership. Ethan was no longer confined to the porch. He was a regular presence in Clara's home, staying for dinner on Tuesdays, attending parent-teacher conferences together, and jointly planning birthday parties. They had found a rhythm, a new kind of family dynamic built on mutual respect and a shared, profound love for their daughter. The romantic love was gone, replaced by something quieter, more durable, a hard-won friendship. Ethan was content. His life was small, but it was real. He was a beloved teacher at the college, and, more importantly, he was Hope's dada. Clara had found her own peace. She had started a small online art consultancy, her passion rekindled, and her life was full. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer ached with the same intensity. Then the ghost returned. A letter arrived at Clara's house, forwarded from her lawyer's office. The return address was a women's transitional facility. The name was Isabella Rossi. Clara's hands trembled as she held the envelope. A cold dread, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, washed over her. She almost threw it away, but a morbid curiosity, a need for closure she didn't know she had, compelled her to open it. The letter was written in neat, careful cursive. Dear Clara, I know you have every reason to hate me, and no reason to read this. I am writing not to ask for your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it, but to offer an explanation and an apology, for whatever it's worth. Prison changed me. It stripped me of my pride, my ambition, and the lies I told myself. I have spent the last 5 years in therapy, facing the person I became. The woman who did that monstrous thing to you was driven by a sickness, an envy and insecurity so deep it warped my reality. I saw your life, your happiness, and I wanted to destroy it because I didn't believe I could ever have it myself. I know now that my actions were my own, but I also know I was encouraged by a world and by a man that valued winning above all else. I take full responsibility for the choice I made, the poison I used. I think about you and Hope every single day. I am profoundly, deeply sorry for the pain and terror I caused you. I have been paroled. I am trying to build a new life. I have no intention of ever intruding on yours. I just needed you to know. Sincerely, Isabella Rossi. Clara read the letter 3 times, her emotions a tangled mess. The old anger was there, but it was muted, overlaid with a strange sense of pity. The sharp, venomous villain of her memory had been replaced by the voice of a broken, repentant woman. She didn't know what to do. She showed the letter to Ethan that evening when he came to pick up Hope. He read it, his face pale. "She's out," he said quietly. "What do we do?" Clara asked, her voice small. "Nothing," Ethan said firmly. "We do nothing. She said she won't intrude, and we take her at her word. We protect Hope. That's all that matters." But 2 weeks later, the unimaginable happened. Clara was picking Hope up from her kindergarten class when she saw her, Isabella. She was standing across the street from the school playground, just watching. She was thinner, her hair cut short, her clothes simple and worn. She wasn't threatening, she was just there. A spectre at the feast. A primal fear shot through Clara. She grabbed Hope's hand and hurried to the car, her heart pounding. She called Ethan, her voice frantic. She was at Hope's school, Ethan. She was just watching them. The calm, patient man he had become vanished, replaced by a flash of the old, protective Titan. "Stay there. Lock your doors. I'm on my way." But Clara knew she couldn't live in fear. Hiding wouldn't solve this. This ghost had to be confronted. The next day, she did something she never thought she would do. She found the address of the transitional facility and went there alone. She found Isabella in a small, communal garden, tending to a patch of wilting roses. Isabella looked up, and when she saw Clara, all the color drained from her face. She looked terrified. "What are you doing here?" Isabella whispered, taking a step back. "You were at my daughter's school," Clara said, her voice shaking but steady. "Why?" Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have. I needed to see her. To see that she was okay, that she was happy. To see the life that I almost..." Her voice broke. "It was a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake. It won't happen again, I swear it." Clara looked at this woman. this shell of the sleek, ambitious powerhouse she once was. She saw the shame, the regret, the years of self-flagellation etched onto her face. And in that moment, the last vestiges of her hatred dissolved, not into forgiveness, but into a weary, profound sadness for the damage they had all inflicted on each other. "You will stay away from my daughter," Clara said, her voice steel. "You will stay away from my family. You will keep the promise you made in your letter." "I will," Isabella sobbed. "I promise." Clara held her gaze for a long moment. "I hope you find a way to live with what you did, Isabella. I hope you find some peace." She turned and walked away, leaving Isabella Rossi weeping amongst the roses. Clara didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. She felt free. The final chain to the past had been broken, not by forgetting, but by facing it. She had walked into the heart of her own trauma and walked out the other side whole. A year after the confrontation with Isabella, on a warm autumn evening, Ethan sat with Clara on her front porch swing. Hope was having her first sleepover at a friend's house, and the quiet felt both strange and peaceful. For years, their interactions had been buffered by the presence of their daughter, their conversations limited to logistics and child-rearing. Tonight was different. Ethan had brought over takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, a small echo of a life they'd once shared. They ate in comfortable silence, the gentle creak of the swing and the chirp of crickets filling the space between them. "I heard from Amelia that you're expanding your consultancy," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "That you're hiring your first employee." Clara smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "I am. It's terrifying and exciting. It feels good to be building something again." "I'm proud of you, Clara," he said, his voice soft with sincerity. "After everything. You've built such a beautiful life." She looked at him. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, catching the silver streaks that now peppered his hair at the temples. The hard lines of the ruthless CEO had been softened by time and humility. He was no longer the man she had married, but he was a man she had grown to respect, even admire. "We built it," she corrected gently. "This life, this peace for hope. We did it together." It was a monumental admission, a recognition of the partnership they had forged from the wreckage of their marriage. Ethan swallowed, his eyes glistening. I never thought I'd hear you say that." "I never thought I would," she admitted. "For a long time, hating you was the only thing that got me out of bed in the morning. But hate is heavy, Ethan. I got tired of carrying it." She paused, taking a deep breath, ready to say the words she had never said. "That day in the courtroom, when you took responsibility, it was the first time I saw the man I thought I had married, the man I fell in love with, the one who was buried under all that ambition." She reached out and placed her hand over his on the swing's chain. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of solidarity, of shared history. "I don't think I can ever forget what happened, but I think I have finally forgiven you." A single tear tracked its way down Ethan's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just nodded, unable to speak, the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies lifting from his shoulders. "And I've forgiven myself," Clara continued, her voice stronger, "for being naive, for not seeing what was right in front of me. We were two different people back then, wanting different things." They sat there for a long time as dusk settled, not as failed spouses, but as survivors. They were two people bound forever, not by the trauma of the past, but by the love for their daughter and the quiet, resilient foundation they had painstakingly built in its place. The fire of their old life had burned everything to the ground, but here, in the ashes, something new had grown. Something quieter, truer and infinitely stronger. It wasn't the ending anyone would have written, but it was real, and it was enough. This story is a testament to the fact that even from the most devastating betrayals, new beginnings are possible. It's about the hard, painful work of redemption and the quiet strength of forgiveness, not just for others, but for ourselves. What did you think of Ethan's journey from a neglectful millionaire to a devoted father? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like Clara's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear a message of hope and second chances.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.